All right. Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Allison Marinick, and I am a marketing manager at MedShift. Thank you for joining us today for our third presentation on semaglutide in our Make the Shift webinar series. For those of you who attended our first two events, in our previous webinars, we discussed a general overview of semaglutide, focusing on sublingual oral semaglutide. Today, we are excited to discuss how to incorporate semaglutide, both oral and injectable, into our office. Before we begin, I just want to call your attention to a few things. First, after the presentation portion of the webinar, we are going to jump into a live Q&A. If you have any questions during the event, please put them in the chat or message me directly, and we'll get to all of your questions during the live Q&A portion. Also, I'd like to call your attention to the poll that should be on your screen, asking if you've incorporated semaglutide into your office yet. We would love to just get a better understanding of our audience and where everyone is in their semaglutide journey. So to jump right in, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Brandon Hendrickson. Dr. Hendrickson received his Doctor of Pharmacy from the University of Arizona College of Pharmacy and has worked in the roles of pharmacy manager, pharmacist in charge, supervising pharmacist, pharmacy general manager, and director of pharmacy in both retail and mail order settings. So his real passion lies in public speaking and doctor education. Dr. Hendrickson has traveled extensively to educate practitioners through one-on-one clinic visits with sales rep, attending trade shows, and giving continuing education talks and seminars and dinner presentations to providers across the country. We are so excited to have Dr. Hendrickson present for us tonight and share his expertise. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hendrickson.
Thank you, Allison. That's quite the introduction. Want to just jump right into it, go over our agenda real quickly. Basically, a quick introduction to semaglutide, because I'm sure most of you watching this right now are at least familiar with it or have a general understanding. We're going to talk a little bit about what's on the market, identify what's best for you and your practices and patients, really get into how to incorporate it into your practice and make it work for you. And going along with that is the implementation, the pricing, the profitability, and then, like Allison said, we'll do a Q&A at the end in case there's anything we didn't go over. So what is semaglutide? Besides probably the most popular drug that's currently on the market and the most popular drug I've ever seen in my life, in my pharmacy career, I've never seen a drug where patients are calling pharmacies out of the blue and saying, hey, I want this drug. How do I get it? I mean, it's literally never happened before, but that's the situation we're in with semaglutide. So semaglutide itself, it belongs to a new family of drugs that came about more recently called GLP-1 RAs, which is glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor and agonists. So basically, these drugs mimic something the body naturally produces. And when the body produces it, it reduces blood sugar, reduces cravings, reduces appetite, kind of has an effect overall on patients' blood glucose levels, appetite levels, and ultimately weight loss and overall health. When we give a little bit of higher doses of the GLP-1s, that's when we start to see it interact with the parts of the brain that suppress appetite and cause some extra fullness. So the benefits, initially this was a drug that was approved for type 2 diabetic patients and saw amazing results. While those patients were on the drugs, they also started to notice most of the patients were losing weight. And so as they dug a little deeper, they realized, oh, the drug's actually causing this directly and has these extra benefits. So they then went back, did some new studies, found specifically that even in non-diabetic patients, it causes weight loss. And now we're off and running with what we have now. So what you'll hear from a lot of patients and what you'll see on the market is typically the brand name drug products that come from drug companies. So Ozempic, Rybelsus, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Wegovy, Zepbound's one of the newer ones. And there's kind of two different medications that we're talking about here. Some of those medications, the generic is the semaglutide. Some of those medications, the generic is the tirzepatide. Two drugs in the same exact family essentially have the same exact results and work in the same way. It's just one drug company came up with one and a different drug company came up with the other, but they're both essentially used identically. So because these drugs were so popular, the brand name products are usually back ordered. So even a type 2 diabetic patient that wants to get on a medication for that they have a hard time getting their hands on. Oftentimes it's a month, 2-month, 3-month backlog or back order. And a lot of pharmacies do not even have the inventory on the shelf to fill a prescription for these patients. So that really opened the door for compounding pharmacies to step in and fill that void that the drug manufacturers couldn't fill at the time. So when we start looking at compounded medications, there's a couple of different things we really need to look for. Now, any compounding pharmacy, any local compounding pharmacy you might have in town or across the country, they can set up a clean room and they can compound sterile injectable products. Those should be done according to certain rules and regulations that are monitored by each state's board of pharmacy. They should be following a certain formula. They should be getting their drugs, their raw powders from a good source. They should be doing testing at the end of that process. So if you're dealing with a local compounding pharmacy who's doing things properly, it should be a good product. Now, the problem is, just like in any field, there's people that play by the rules and there's people that don't. So some pharmacies are doing everything that they should at that level to yield a good product. But we also hear about the pharmacies that aren't doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, and therefore their product is suboptimal, if we want to call it that. A whole nother level of compounding pharmacy is referred to as 503B compounding. Now, these compounding pharmacies are set up to essentially mirror what is happening at a drug manufacturing facility. These 503B compounding pharmacies are regulated by the FDA, and the FDA comes in and inspects those pharmacies just like they go in and inspect the manufacturer's facilities. So a 503B compounding pharmacy is held to the same standards as the manufactured drug facilities. And ultimately, what does that mean? That means that the product that they're turning out, every single step along the way is verified and documented and regulated so that the product that a 503B pharmacy turns out is going to be consistent and it's going to be reliable. And there's really not going to be any doubt about the efficacy and the effectiveness of that drug. I mean, essentially, if you're getting a 503B product, you've got the peace of mind of knowing that that is as close as you're going to get to having a drug from a drug company. So it's not considered exactly a generic of a drug company drug. It's still considered a compounded drug, but it's compounded at the highest standards that exist and therefore gives you the most peace of mind and has the least amount of liability on the provider who's using that product. So ultimately, at the end of the day, a 503B product is going to ensure the highest quality and really the highest safety that you can get. So not to say that the other pharmacies are doing it wrong or improperly, but a 503B is just a whole nother level of safety and efficacy. And that's what we're talking about with the product that we're bringing to MedShift. So when we start talking specifically about semaglutide, there are options. There is an oral option and there's an injectable option. The injectable option is kind of the tried and true and gold standard at this point. Everyone knows about the injection. It's been used for a number of years. There's really no debating how it works, why it works, what it does. The oral option's a little bit newer. I would say probably a little bit less data compiled on it at this point, but anecdotally, especially in the compounding space, we know that there are a lot of successful patients out there taking a daily oral sublingual product instead of receiving a weekly injectable product. Now, we can kind of get into which patients would be good for what, one versus the other. Ultimately, the majority of the patients probably ought to be on the injectable, at least to get started. If you have those patients that are afraid of a needle or, maybe have done the injections in the past and didn't like it, maybe those were the ones that we would want to start off on an oral. But the injectable just being such a gold standard and so tried and true at this point, it really makes the most sense to probably start most of the patients straight on the injectable, but then always knowing that the oral's there in case we need to go that route as well. Kind of just preference when it comes down to it to a certain degree. So who are our patients? Well, pretty much any patient that you see probably wants to be on this drug. It's so prevalent. Patients have family members, friends, coworkers that they've seen weight loss, and they go, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" And come to find out it's semaglutide. That's why we're getting our calls at the pharmacy every day of, how do I get this? I mean, literally all the patients need to know is who to go to write this for them, because they're already sold on the medication itself. So if we start to look at who to select or who to allow to get on this, it's really any patient who's overweight. There's no set in stone guideline that says a patient has to have a certain BMI to be eligible to get the medication. At this point, it's pretty much anyone that's overweight that feel, where the provider feels like they could benefit from weight loss. Not to mention the other benefits of kind of stabilizing blood sugar, getting blood sugars lower, things like that. So when it comes to patient selection, most offices that start this, they don't have to bring it up to the patient. They put a little sign in the waiting room that says, "We now have oral semaglutide," or injectable semaglutide, or "Ask us about our weight loss program featuring GLP-1s," and the patients will self-identify and say, "Hey, I want that. I've been looking for that." They self-select. So why add semaglutide? Well, like I said, because the majority of your patients are probably already wanting it or potentially getting it from somewhere else. If we look globally at the numbers, it's massive. I mean, the market for obesity, weight loss, that has existed since forever. Now we have a true treatment for it that works well, and so the demand's gone through the roof. Especially patient populations that you guys are seeing, we see those patients even being more active in reaching out and trying to have this as an option for themselves, because they're already in tune with their health and wellness, and they're already actively seeking out aesthetic medical procedures. I mean, this all goes hand in hand with essentially probably the majority of your patients that you're already seeing. I've kind of mentioned that it's, the marketing has already been done for you by the news articles out there, the newspaper articles, the word of mouth. People know, people want it, people are trying to find it. And it's not just in terms of the benefits that they'll see from the weight loss. It's all the ancillary benefits as well from them losing weight. Many patients report less pain in their bones and joints and knees and things like that. They feel better, with the lost weight. They feel more energetic. Some doctors have incorporated this to have patients lose weight in order to get them ready for surgeries or for other body procedures. So there's all sorts of different ways and reasons why adding semaglutide into a practice makes sense. When it comes time, if you guys make the decision to say, yes, we want to incorporate semaglutide into our practice, we want to offer this, what we recommend is to make it a program. Make it a one-stop shop for this patient to receive everything they need. For one thing, it complements many of the other procedures and many of the other offerings that you already have in the clinic. So whether it's, weight loss devices you're using, cool sculpting, things like that. If you're doing facial fillers, skin and body tightening devices, the surgical procedures, and especially IV nutrition, if you're doing any IV nutrition, all those programs go hand in hand with a patient who starts on semaglutide. So what you're offering to the patient is they come to you to start. They come to you weekly for monitoring. You keep an eye on their progression. You keep an eye on their dosing. You're taking pictures. You're charting their progress. You're also supplementing any issues they're having, or if they're having some side effects or they're feeling a little groggy, we can talk about the IV nutrition. But everything else kind of builds into this one existing program. So it really just blossoms out from there. And a lot of it is going to start with the patient education. So patients are going to have questions. They're all excited. They know they want to do this, but then they stop and say, well, wait a minute. Well, okay, so what do I actually need to do? How does this work? Well, that's where we're here to help you from start to finish, educate the patient, keep them on board, keep them happy, keep them going all the way through. Basically setting them up for success because they understand why they're doing this and what the end result is going to be. And we've also given them the proper expectations of how this is going to work for them. We put a lot of work into the starter kit, and the starter kit has a lot of education, both for the staff, for the patients, the kind of conversations that are going to come up, the frequently asked questions. That's really what's going to build you guys out. Once we go through that a couple times, you're going to have down 99% of the questions that a patient's going to have. And then we're always here for the other 1% that, might be oddball things that we haven't even heard yet. But the patient education piece is really what's going to put your patient's mind at ease and is what's going to make you stand out as offering this versus someone else down the road that is, giving a patient a shot and sending them on their way and never seeing them again. The idea is you're going to do this for the patient, with the patient, partnering with the patient. And once you get them where they want to be, oh my gosh, they are so happy and so thrilled. And you've essentially created a loyal customer forever now. So we've got the patient education pieces available that, especially in the starter kit's the main thing there. So we want to do this. We bring it into the office. We start telling patients we have it. Now, how does this work? There's a couple different dosing regimens out there. And there's the one gold standard tried and true regimen is this option number 1 that you're seeing on the slide. The patient is going to do the first dosing step for the first 4 weeks. And let me just step back a second. When we're talking about the injection, it is a once a week injection. So if the patient comes in on a Wednesday and gets their shot, every Wednesday is their injection day after that. So the first 4 weeks, they're going to do the first step in the dosing regimen, which is 0.25 milligrams. Or if we're looking on the syringe, that equates to 10 units on an insulin syringe, very small little amount. Typically, they're going to do that dose for the first 4 weeks. Then they're going to bump up to 0.5 milligrams. They're going to do that dose for 4 weeks. Then they're going to bump up to 1 milligram. Now, if you look at the dosing chart, it'll say they do that for 4 weeks. Then they go to 1.7 for 4 weeks. Then they go to 2.4 to 4 weeks. I'm going to tell you right now, the majority of our patients hit that 1 milligram dose and stay at that 1 milligram dose for months. I mean, basically, we're doing those first couple steps to get the patient's body used to it, to get the drug on board, to start having the effects. We're starting low to hold off on any side effects. It's a gradual taper up. The drug itself is really designed to really kick in and start working in the patient's body at that 1 milligram dose. So there's not a lot of action going on for those first couple dosing steps, at least that the patient sees. Their number's not going to be changing a whole lot. Their body's getting used to it. Their body's adjusting. Their blood sugar's going down. We're essentially getting their body ready for hitting that 1 milligram dose, because once they hit that 1 milligram dose, that's really where things start to get exciting for them. Their number starts to change. The weight starts to go down. They start to notice more visual weight loss. And, I always tell patients and providers that, this drug is suppressing the appetite. Once we get to that 1 milligram dose, the patients are going to report that their appetite is suppressed. Once their appetite is suppressed, you can't really suppress it any more than that. So throwing more drug at it isn't going to give you any extra appetite suppression. So as long as their appetite is suppressed at the 1 milligram dose, keep them there as long as that continues. Now, if after 3-4 months of 1 milligram, they come back and say, I'm starting to feel hungry after maybe day 4, 5, 6 after that dose, that would be a good indication to say, okay, that dose, your body's probably getting used to that dose. Let's bump you up now to go back and get that same efficacy we had before. So this is not a race to get a patient to the 2.4 milligram dose. Quite the opposite. We want to hold off on having the patient have to get 2.4 milligram. Ideally, the patient should never have to get 2.4 milligram. And honestly, a lot of the patients that we see that do get up to that 2.4 milligram, unfortunately, a lot of them are patients where this drug it may not work for them. Their body just doesn't process it like it should, or processes it too fast, or for whatever reason. There's always going to be that small percentage of patients that any drug we give them won't work for one reason or another. But the majority of patients will be able to stay at the 1 milligram dose for multiple months, if not for the entire length of their therapy, until they get to their target goal of their weight number. Now, the other dosing option that's come up recently is this bottom one, which I also like. It kind of starts getting us up a little quicker. We only spend 2 weeks on that first dosing step. We then do the bump up to the second dosing step for 4 weeks. We then have another kind of a short step up to an in-between dose of the 0.75 milligrams, then getting up to the 1 milligram. So one way to look at this would be, if a patient's tolerating the medication well, not feeling any side effects, not having any issues after being on that initial dose for 2 weeks, it couldn't hurt to bump them up to the 0.5 milligram to kind of get things going a little quicker for them. Now, if they're a patient that feels like maybe they're feeling a little groggy, maybe they're feeling like they're having some nauseousness, maybe we hold them at that initial dose until they work through that. But these would be kind of the two dosing regimens that I would hang on the wall and expect that this is what a patient should be going through, with very few exceptions. One of these two dosing regimens is probably going to suit them and shouldn't be much reason to alter these. And there certainly shouldn't be any reason to go outside of the once a week injection. Have never seen any benefit to like a twice a week. It's once a week, gold standard. The only thing that changes is how much are we giving them on a weekly basis. So, and obviously these dosing charts are included in the starter kit. Everything you guys need to accurately do it is right in there. So if we start looking at the cost element of this, it becomes evident that the more drug the patient needs, the more it costs on a monthly basis. I mean, kind of goes without saying, but there it is in black and white. Initially, it's very economical for the patient and for the practice to say, that initial dose is going to be $34 a month as the clinic's cost. Once we get up to the 1 milligram dose, we're about $136 a month for the clinic's cost. Now you can see from there, the price starts to go up if we have one of those patients that's needing more and more of the drug. It's going to end up costing them more for the treatment. But you'll find that once it's working, most patients are glad to pay whatever it's going to take to keep that effect going for them. But it also brings up the point that keeping them at the 1 milligram dose is going to be more cost effective for them. It's going to be more cost effective for you guys. And it's also going to have them just be happier that they're not having to shell out more than they need to, but still get the results that they're looking for. So this is the dosing chart that breaks down on a cost basis, but also kind of tells you if you want to do some of the in-between dosing, or if you didn't want to take a full step to the next dosing, there's other options built in there, as needed. So maintaining profitability, what are you guys going to charge for this program that you're going to implement? As a general recommendation, what we usually tell offices is that it makes sense to charge a patient $350 to $600 a month for this weight loss program. That's going to include obviously their initial workup, their initial education, their initial shot. Once a week thereafter, they're going to pop in, you're going to give them their shot, you're going to have them get on the scale, take pictures, make sure everything's going well, and hold their hand through the process once a week from there on out. Now, going back to the cost again, that first vial there's the two different vial sizes. If we're starting with that smaller vial, it's essentially costing you $70 a month to get that patient treated and off and running. On the low end, that means you're going to net $280 a month per patient. If you're able to charge more like $600 a month for the program, you're looking to net $530 per patient. Now, I'm here in the Scottsdale, Arizona area. I've got clinics here that are able to charge $1,000 to $1,500 a month for this service because of their location, because of their patient demographics, because they're just facilities that are able to charge more because of their clientele. The cost to the patient, if they were to go to Walgreens or Costco and get one of the brand name products, is upwards of $1,500 a month for the manufactured commercial product. And that's if they can even get their hands on it. If they're paying out of pocket for the compounded product, if they're able to get it themselves, that's going to be upwards of $600 a month. So it shows you that, by looking at your demographic and your location and kind of where you guys stand and what your patients are willing to afford, you got a lot of flexibility as to what's appropriate for your patients. But knowing that their alternative is $1,500 a month or potentially, $600 or $100 a month or more, you guys being right in that price range with all the services that you're offering and kind of the one-stop shop for them and the care that you're giving them, it goes a long way, and it allows you to collect, hopefully on the higher side of things, to have it be a profitable endeavor for you. And that's something that obviously we're here to help work with you on, help you sort out the pricing if there's any questions, or walk you through any of that. As we have set up quite a few clinics at this point with this from start to finish. So basically, to wrap it up, I mean, we kind of know semaglutide, what it is, what it's doing, how it's working. It's obviously one of the most in-demand drugs I've ever seen. And pretty much if you put a sign on the street that says semaglutide here, you will have brand new patients knocking on your door. The way we have it structured and the partnerships that we have gives us a great return on investment, very high profitability product that's also safe, effective, probably better than what your competitors have around you because of where this drug's being sourced from and the resources you have behind you. So we're really trying to do everything we can to make you guys your local expert in weight loss using semaglutide in its different forms. When it comes to the dosing, go by those guidelines that we're giving you. Those are really the gold standard that have been, approved by everyone. And we can always help make sure that your patients are educated, that the medication's available, and we're here to help support that any way we can. So want to thank you. I'll hand it back over to Allison and obviously be here for any questions that might come up.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hendrickson. That was such an informative presentation. Before we jump into the Q&A section, I just want to mention that we do offer both oral and injectable semaglutide on the MedShift store. And if you are interested in purchasing, you can visit store.medshift.com or contact one of our amazing account managers for more information. And now let's start the Q&A section. I did receive a few questions during the presentation, but also please remember, if you have any questions now, the chat is open for any that you might have. One question I did receive was that if this webinar was going to be recorded, I forgot to mention that at the top of the webinar, but this will be recorded and will be sent out to everybody tomorrow. And now on to the next question. So Dr. Hendrickson, we had a question that why are there two different sized vials, and when would I know which to buy?
Yes, that's a great question. I should have hit on that. So the medication, the injectable, comes as a 2.5 milligram per mil concentration. We have it in either a 2 ml vial or a 4 ml vial. So it's 5 milligrams in 2 mLs or it's 10 milligrams in 4 mLs. If we have a brand new patient walk in the door and we want to start them on the injection, the 2 ml vial is going to last them 2.5 months. So their first 2.5 months of therapy will come out of that one 2 ml vial. So it kind of gives you an idea that the smaller vial is ideal for a brand new patient starting from scratch. So definitely want to have those. The larger vials are going to be for the patient who has worked themselves up to maybe the 1 milligram dose at that point. The smaller vial would get them through month 1, get them through month 2, and get them the first 2 doses of month 3, which is should be the first 2 doses of their 1 milligram amount. At that point, we'd probably want to get them the larger vial because now they're going to be going through it quicker. And it'll just last longer. The vials themselves are good for 6 months. So that's the one thing to keep in mind is, If you want to get multiple vials, we do need to make sure that we're not exceeding the expiration date. But in general, the smaller vials are going to be ideal for a patient starting from scratch. The larger vials are the ones we'd want to bring in for those patients who are kind of continuing therapy after they've stepped up to probably their maintenance dose.
All right, awesome. And then we've had a couple more questions roll in. This next one is, can I just order vials for my clinic?
So in this situation, the medication is coming from a 503B pharmacy and it's being distributed through a 503A pharmacy. What that means is that we do need to have individual prescriptions for individual patients. So what a lot of clinics do is that they will order 3 vials for a certain patient and have them shipped and billed right back to the clinic. That's kind of the norm. What we would expect is that all these vials are getting shipped back to the clinic. So they have a label on the outside of the prescription bottle with the patient's name, and inside that is the actual injection vial that the office uses. So in general, clinics are gonna order it for specific patients. Once you get it into your clinic and put it in your refrigerators, obviously it's up to you guys how you manage it from there.
Awesome. All right.
Oh, lost her there for a second. She's coming back. Oh, there you are.
Oh, sorry about that. We had one question that was, there's been some concern about counterfeit semaglutide from pharmacies in the news. How can we ensure that we are receiving quality supplies?
Yeah, and there is a lot of bad press, and honestly, there's some bad players out there in the market who are just trying to make a buck off the fact that semaglutide is so hot. So that's where it comes down to partnering with someone you can trust. When it comes to a local pharmacy, yeah, you can dig in and ask them for their formulas, ask them for their testing results, ask them for the certificates of analysis for their raw powders. I mean, there's certain things you can ask a local compounding pharmacy to try to give yourself a little bit of peace of mind. We've kind of gone the extra step of partnering with a 503B pharmacy so that we know the FDA has essentially already answered those questions for us. And we can see that it's documented, it's in black and white. So we've kind of alleviated most of those concerns by just simply partnering with a 503B pharmacy in the first place.
Awesome. I have one question that is, who would be a good candidate for the oral semaglutide option?
Yeah, and that comes up quite a bit. So the oral semaglutide really has a lot of different uses right now. You might have some patients that simply say, I can't bear the thought of getting an injection even once a week. Can't do needles, forget it. Then say, great. For you, we have a daily sublingual option. It's a tablet. You put it right under your tongue. You're off and running, no problem. Another option could be a patient who is maintained on the injection and maybe wants to switch to an oral option over time to give them a little more flexibility in their dosing. We have some patients that are, were maintained on their once a month or once a week injection dosing, and now they're doing a sublingual every 2 to 3 days, and can be a little more cost effective for them, not having to pop in and get the shots. That could be another thing, is if you have a patient that maybe they travel a lot and they can't come into the office once a week to get a shot, maybe the oral is a good option for them. So kind of something to always have in your back pocket. I would always kind of start with the injection because, like I said, it is kind of just the gold standard, tried and true option. And then know if there's patients that have issues, then the oral is always there for those as well.
Awesome. All right. The next question is, as a physician, how do I adjust dosing for thyroid meds, OCPs, and other oral drugs that can be affected by the gastroparesis?
So we haven't seen a lot of studies yet done on how they're interacting together. It's true. The drug does slow down the gut, and it slows down the food and everything else going through the gut. That's just an effect of the medication. Now, what I've not seen are any good studies that say, hey, for this particular drug, do this. For this particular drug, do that. If a drug is getting absorbed in the gut, I mean, pretty much any drug we take orally, the assumption is it's getting absorbed in the stomach or it's getting absorbed in the gut. And most drugs are there long enough where they're going to get absorbed completely one way or the other. They're not racing through the gut and out. So at this point, I haven't seen any dose adjustments that are necessary, but it wouldn't be a bad idea that if we have a patient, especially on who's sensitive on thyroid or sensitive on those, maybe drawing an extra lab, maybe drawing labs a little sooner to keep an eye on it. Maybe after the first 30 days of semaglutide therapy would be appropriate. So in general, I would say maybe just a little extra monitoring, either on the patient's labs for that condition, or just on their general sense of how their medication for those other conditions is working before versus after the semaglutide.
Okay, wonderful. This next question is, if a patient misses a week, what dose would you suggest restarting them at?
As long as the patient was tolerating it, missing a dose isn't the end of the world. I mean, essentially, we give a dose, we give them their dose, they get a big bolus of it, it slowly tapers out of the body by the time their next dose hits and they go up again. So in this case, what we're talking about is they miss their dose, they just go a week with no drug. But we essentially don't have enough, nothing's been undone in their body. We just go back to giving them normally whatever that previous dose was, go ahead and give that again. Now, if they miss a month or they miss a couple months or they stop therapy for some reason and want to start again, well, then it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe take a step or two back and start them off slow just to get the body used to it again, just to get it built up again, and then going from there. But, unless they were off at 6 months or a year, I wouldn't recommend starting the whole thing over from scratch. Usually if they miss one dose, I would just go right back to taking the next dose as is. If they miss more, maybe take a step back just to make sure they aren't going to have any side effects show up and then go on as they were.
All right. Awesome. We had someone ask, is tirzepatide better than semaglutide? They had heard that it is to reduce side effects.
So if you read the tirzepatide literature, they'll say that tirzepatide is better. And if you read the semaglutide literature, it'll usually indicate that the semaglutide is better. At this point, it does seem like the tirzepatide might have some benefits. But the tirzepatide tends to be 2 to 3 times the cost of the semaglutide. So at least like in a lot of the pharmacies that I work with, when we present that option to a patient or to a doctor and say, okay, tirzepatide might have some benefits. We don't know for sure yet. If you'd like that, it's 2 to 3 times the cost, or we can do the semaglutide. Immediately, everyone says, Joe, just give me the semaglutide then. I'll do that one. Where I could see the tirzepatide having a bigger role is maybe for those patients that felt like they didn't do well on the semaglutide. So maybe those patients that worked all the way up and got to the 2.4 and didn't get the results they want, that would probably be a good candidate who maybe would benefit from tirzepatide. But right now, as a general rule, the supposed benefits of tirzepatide aren't really outweighing the real world costs involved with one versus the other. And not to mention, it's still a little bit up in the air as to if it's truly better or how much better. And so at this point, the semaglutide tends to be a little bit more of the tried and true one. So we're kind of sticking with that, at least until maybe we can get the cost point on the tirzepatide down to a more reasonable level.
Okay, that makes sense. That sounds good. We had a question about if the patient experiences side effects such as nausea when increasing dose, what dose should you put them on? And then how do you increase it moving forward?
So here's what I'll say about the nauseousness. Nauseousness tends to happen around when the dose is given or in the hours after the dose is given. So a lot of patients, if they're taking the medication home to do it themselves, they'll do their injection at night, they'll go to bed. By the time they wake up, they're good to go. Now, if a patient is reporting nauseousness later on in the week, especially in the afternoons or the evenings, So much of the time, it is because the patient hasn't eaten anything yet. And so as a result, their body is causing them to feel nauseousness as a trigger to say, hey, you haven't eaten anything yet. We need to eat something. And it's bringing on that feeling. So what I tell patients is, look, if you give your shot on Friday and Wednesday afternoon, you're feeling nauseous, think about if you've eaten anything yet in the day and have a little meal. The majority of the time, that fixes things right away. So while patients will report feeling nauseous, it's often because they simply haven't followed kind of the general guidelines of making sure they're having meals throughout the day, because they generally don't feel like they want to eat all the time. So it's something to mention to a patient that oftentimes it's not actually the drug causing the nauseousness. It's more the fact they just simply haven't eaten anything that day, and having a meal will fix that issue for them. Now, if you have a patient that for some reason is just feeling the effects of nauseousness with the medication, then I would hold them at the lower dose until that they feel like that's kind of passed. If they bump up and they feel like it comes back, if it's not something that goes away after a day or two, or if they feel like it's not manageable, then yes, bump them back down and try to go through one of those intro step dosing wise until they get to the point where their body's accustomed to it, to the point where they're not feeling that dose related nauseousness, and then bump up the dosing from there. It's not one of those things where there's really a tried and true, if this, then that kind of scenario for that. Doctors are going to have to feel it out a little bit. But first and foremost, make sure it's not nauseousness caused simply because the patient isn't eating throughout the day.
Wonderful. That makes sense. We had someone who asked for clarification on the 6 months. I believe that was earlier. And they've said that they were told that reconstituted medication sterility was only good for 28 days.
So, yeah, there are, if we're taking a couple of medications in a pharmacy and combining them and we're not doing any testing, then yes, there are rules like that in place that say 14 days, 28 days expiration dates. What we're dealing with in the 503B is they're following a formula that has been tested and verified by independent labs and shown that it's potent out to 6 months. Now, the testing stops at 6 months. So it's not like on the 5th month and 30th day it's good, and on the 6th month and 1 day it's bad. It's just that we know it's exactly as potent as it's supposed to be out to 6 months. What we don't know is how long that potency stays after that. So the pharmacy has to put a 6-month expiration date to be safe, because that's what the data tells them. But beyond that is a little bit unknown. So yes, while there are times in the compounding space that shorter expiration dates are required, the 503B space and the testing that's been done allows for the 6-month dating.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that clarification on that. We had a question about liability. If there was an issue with the drug contamination, is the liability on the provider or the maker of the drug? And do you ship to the patients?
Yeah. So as far as the liability goes, I mean, the liability on what's in that vial is typically on the pharmacy. They're the ones supplying it. Ultimately, if you've ever heard of one of these things happening in the news, it goes back to the pharmacy because they provided a bad product, and that's on them. The doctor's liability is to show that, the question to a provider would be, well, why did you partner with that pharmacy? Well, in this case, we partnered with them because they're a 503B. We knew they were registered. We knew what that means, that they're FDA approved. I don't see how a provider could ever be faulted with partnering with a 503B pharmacy, whereas you might have more liability partnering with a local compounding pharmacy, unless you could show your due diligence. Did you ask for certificates of analysis? Did you ask for their test results? There's a lot more on a provider partnering with a local compounding pharmacy versus partnering with a 503B, because they have the reassurance that facility is already inspected by the FDA and held to a different standard. As far as the shipping goes, it's always up to each individual clinic of where they want the medication shipped to. Most clinics will have it shipped back to them at the clinic. If for some reason they want it shipped directly to the patient, that can be done as well. There's actually a checkbox right on the fax form that indicates what they want.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. And then one last question, I think, before we wrap up is, what do you tell patients worried about long-term dependence / gaining weight back after stopping?
So we call this a program, and part of the program is giving them the medication, but part of the program is also the education and teaching the patient that how to maintain this long term. Because let's be honest, this drug is not fixing or changing anything in the patient's body permanently. It works as long as they get their shot. It gets them down to the weight that they want to be at. If they stop the medication, it's going to be on them to maintain it. So what we want to do for the patients is, while they're going through this journey and while they're getting down to the weight, we also want to be educating them and training them on how to change their brain and how to think their eating habits, their exercise habits, how to develop those other things that they're going to need in order to maintain that weight once the medication is gone. So that needs to be part of the program. And the patients need to understand that if they don't do those other things, then yeah, they are at risk of their body taking on weight. If they go back to eating the way they ate that got them overweight in the first place, well, their body's going to react the same as it did before. And it's going to put on weight, and they're going to end up in the same place. So I know the starter pack talks about that a lot as well. And so yes, as much education as possible on diet and exercise at every one of those weekly visits will help ensure that that's a patient that gets to the end and says, okay, awesome. You helped me get to my weight. And now I know these other things that I can do to keep myself at this weight. And now we set them up for success.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. And with that, that concludes our question and answer section and our webinar as a whole. If we did not get to your question tonight, our team will be in touch with more information. I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and their thoughtful questions and for making this such an engaging event. Thank you, Dr. Hendrickson, for your presentation and partnership. This was such an excellent and educational night. And I just want to remind everyone that if we'll be in contact with them, and that if you want to find more information about semaglutide, you can visit store.medshift.com or contact your account manager, and they'll be more than happy to help you and find any answers for questions that you might have. Thank you all so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.